Alright everyone, it's time to talk about how Trump can use tax reform as a trap for the Democrats, prevail probably in 2020. And this goes hand in hand with his strategy, it seems. This is just my opinion. I haven't seen it borne out yet. But I believe that DACA getting sent to the legislature is a little bit of a half-hearted handshake, not just for the Democrats, but for some of the never-Trumpers to get them aboard with other parts of his agenda, whether it's funding the basis of the wall, some degree of deportation, some permanent legislative fix to aspects of our immigration policy. I believe he's getting half of what he wants in that situation, which is a major victory for him because a lot of people want him to get absolutely nothing. It appeases the core fans. It also helps reach across the aisle and forces the Democrats to give him a reach around, basically, because then they have to keep coming to him and saying, oh, no, we want this, we want that, and he's like, aha, well, there are things that I want too. He can do this with tax reform, and I'll tell you exactly how. Donald Trump is in an esteemed position right now, where he's still got the Democrats confused and a segment of the Republicans that don't want to work with him. He can get most of them to work with him, because most of them, they'll just be partisan. You know, they're from some red state. They're not going to go against what Trump says. They're from some swing state that voted for Trump. They're not exactly on board with the idea of standing in his way, especially when, who's his opposition within the Republican Party? John McCain, who won't be around much longer. Mitch McConnell, who nobody likes. Paul Ryan, sometimes, that nobody likes. Where's the rest of the opposition? Them and their friends. People who are generally unpopular. People who are known neocon fucking rhinos. That's his opposition within the Republican Party. If he can get a dozen Democrats on board, it doesn't matter to him as long as he gets something passed. Here's how Trump should structure tax reform to force the Democrats to either vote for it or sink their electoral chances. He needs to come out very publicly, not just on Twitter, on TV too, unfortunately for the TV audience. He needs to make it explicitly clear, hey, right now, big corporations in the United States, some of them don't really pay a lot. And he's already alluded to this. Did you notice? He's always going after Amazon. Now, I make money through Amazon, so I perhaps feel more positively towards them as a company. I've never had any of my books censored or anything like that, but it is a good point to make here. Goes after Amazon. Oh, they're not paying their proper taxes. Now, that's half true at most. That's definitely a fact here. But it's a sign, I think, of things to come. He should come out and in front of all the American people say, hey, small businesses are getting hammered here. There's where the lifeblood of your economy is. That helps create some middle-class jobs, smaller manufacturers that used to exist in these small town regions that propped up the local economy. Hey, guess why you're being screwed right now working double shift at Burger King? Oh, that's right, it's because all these business moved out. Now, Trump can, first, he can beat his own drum there. And he can say, well, we ripped apart the TPP, we're renegotiating NAFTA, that's the basis of how we're going to solve your problems. But number two is tax reform. Lower taxes on the middle class especially, and the working class, I would say. Lower taxes on business in general. Right now, the United States does have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and the highest in the developed world. That is a fact. Democrats always proclaim that that's not true, but the reason why it's not true for a lot of big industry is because they use tax loopholes and armies of lawyers to get around it. Your mom and pop bookstore doesn't have an army of accountants and lawyers. All he has to do is come out and tell the American people this. It's like an unspoken secret among Republicans. They know that it's a problem, but the neocons don't want to say anything because until recently, and here's how he can set up his trap, until recently the Republicans were the big corporate party. The Democrats were the party of a handful of massive international corporations and a lot of grassroots and small business funding. The Republicans had the general core of large-ish corporate endeavors funding them. Trump doesn't. Now, Trump can scare the never-Trumpers at the same time. He needs to come out with a hard line against the tax system that we have now that favors a handful of very big multinational firms and screws everybody else all the way up to and including regional chains that are technically large businesses but don't have quite so massive a presence. They operate on a little bit more slim a budget. They've got a half a dozen accountants instead of 200 of them. They've got a couple of lawyers that they work with instead of an army of Harvard graduates. They get screwed. They pay that high corporate tax rate, and it is stagnating our economy. What's happening is that large corporations that pay little to nothing, they don't really experience competition, and if the government does do anything tax-related, some of them will offshore. Something should be done about that too. There would be offshoring, but that's the thing. It would weaken those corporations. We'd be getting more tax revenue from them if the tax reform is properly structured. And by giving relief to entrepreneurs, small businesses, and the working and middle class, people will begin rising up again into those rungs and out of those rungs of society. There will be more upward mobility. All Trump has to do is come out and say this to the American people. A lot of those center leftists will get on board. He'll have more business Democrats pretty soon supporting him. Millions of them. The Democrats will lose virtually the entire middle class from their voting base. This includes a large segment of minority voters. And this is how he really gives them the ultimate skull-pounding jackhammering that they really deserve for being so inept that they don't even have a fucking platform right now. It's all about the money. And if he accomplishes this, if he gets it passed, especially if there's some degree of bipartisan support, whoop, there go the neoliberals. There go the never-Trumpers. He just crushed them out of existence. A lot of them won't get reelected again. Because then he can come out and he can say, hey, it's not, he'll come to his fans, he'll say, you do realize this isn't really a partisan issue. There are Republicans that stood against this. Look at how great it's working. And it will. Consumer confidence will rise again. The economy will get even faster. We're past 3% growth right now. A lot of people predicted it was impossible to attain that. Trump already has. And he doesn't even have to really do anything to accomplish it. He just had to get rid of the TPP and be Donald Trump, and all of a sudden confidence rose so much people started spending and lending again. Could be a bubble. He can address that separately, though, and I'm not a fan of debt spending, and part of it is the government continues to pump the markets with funny money. But I think what he's hoping is that if he gets the economy moving again in a positive direction, income begins to incline and it catches up with the deficit and eventually evens it out. This would be sort of Bill Clinton-esque. Of course, Bill Clinton didn't do anything to accomplish that. He tried to hold it back. That was accomplished by dot-coms, by big tech, the early rise-ups within tech, almost all of which were based in the United States, started feeding massive sums of revenue into the U.S. economy, absorbing unemployment. Costs were also lower at the time. We can return to that golden era and stay there if we can get the government to stop meddling in everybody's business. And that's the other part of it. In the future, Trump should move to deregulate things. He's already doing that on an environmental and Department of Education kind of level, within the bureaus themselves. It would be nice if he would go further. Personally, I think those are the last concerns that should be deregulated. I think it's a lot of red tape involving businesses should be torn up. We should go back to the level of regulations we were in the 80s or the 90s if we want to get moving again. Because even though you would still have intervention, it would be a lot less. And by the way, I'm pragmatic and honest enough to admit, so long as there's a grand chessboard in this world, we're not going to operate under true free market capitalism. But we don't need to launch off into total socialism. We can reverse course somewhat. We can go back to the way things were in the earlier atomic era, and things will be much more prosperous as a result. It is possible to do that, but the fundamental basis for that is tax reform. If somebody is poor, they want upward mobility, but the tax rate doesn't favor them having upward mobility, then they have none. The government has structured the tax code in such a way. They put a huge onerous burden on all the businesses that might give them an upper class job and make it almost impossible for them to break through unless they've got a couple of master's degrees or a rich relative or they know somebody who works in an industry and they're already skilled in it. And because of regulation, it makes it harder for people to do the whole sort of family business thing. Like in the past, you'd think, oh, you know, my dad fixed cars and he taught me all he knows. And I know all the dudes at the auto shop, so now I can go and fix cars because, you know, I just know how to do it. No, 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 now you need a piece of paper from the state, a piece of paper from the town, you need full background check, you need to do this deposit, get this insurance. There's your problem right there. Somebody who's perfectly skilled can't even get a job in what they're skilled in half the time. No, they go and they flip burgers. Oh, what a wonderful life. You know, those kinds of low-end, dead-end jobs were meant to be summer work for high schoolers and for people who were still in college. That's essentially what they were meant to be. Instead, you have people with upper-level degrees at Walmart. And they're not even like a manager at Walmart, just a regular employee. There's your problem. There is no upward mobility. A person has to practically exempt themselves. They have to use the Wild West of the internet, like I have, to exempt themselves entirely from that regulatory process. Still get screwed on taxes, by the way, in order to actually make it. That's your upward mobility. And they're trying to stop that too. Oh, let's have an internet sales tax. We're going to regulate what you can say on the internet. Maybe we'll even declare it a public utility. Oh, that'll be a great time. That's their plan. Squish out any upward mobility to keep the people slaves, I guess. Trump can outmaneuver if Trump wants to be sky-high popular, I mean, if he wants to get above 50% and stay there for years at a time with very little added effort, all he has to do is reform the tax code. Get a little bit more growth in, see if you can hit 4%. Get more middle-class jobs in. Bring back the feeling that people can make it in the country. It doesn't have to be uniformly true for every American, but there has to be a prevailing notion that it is at least possible. We don't have that. Trump merely being there and being a big money mogul is helping with consumer confidence. That's growing our economy. It's just because he's there. He doesn't have to do jack shit to accomplish this. But you have to take tangible steps to make it last. Otherwise, it goes away. A few years later, it will begin to decline again. Because people no longer have that feeling, hey, Trump's in charge. We got Trump change now. We're not living on Obama socialism or Bush, hey, I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing sort of ethos. That's what he needs to do. Get the Democrats on board. And tell the American people this, oh, anyone that's voting against this is fundamentally voting in favor of big corporations. You think the Democrats are willing to do that? Now, most of them they'll vote along with your tax reform. Give them a couple of bones. Give them a couple of their pork barrel projects like usual. That's how you negotiate with these idiots. Otherwise, you get 99% of what you want, because what Trump wants, the partisan Republicans will back him regardless. There's most of what you need in the House and the Senate. That gets him most of the way there. It gives him 90% of the votes he needs. All he has to do is gull a few of the Democrats into voting for it. The Never-Trumpers won't. They're big neocon corporatists. People like John McCain, very much in bed with multinational corporations. They love globalism. They're never going to vote for such tax reform. Make it bipartisan. That makes it even stronger. Makes it the Democrats will flee to Trump's tax reform from the Tom Perez's of their own party to save their own skins if they're in vulnerable areas, especially those that are up for election. If you can do this before the midterms, all that much better. The Republicans will carry it. Trump will win in 2020, but it needs to be proper tax reform, not a Band-Aid. You need a much bigger bandage than that. Because what we've got is a problem where big corporations pay very little. And they should be paying that sky-high rate, but they never actually do. Why don't you just lower the overall rate and make sure that they actually pay it? They're not paying nearly as much, would be much more competitive with these other developed nations, but at the same time, it's not going to screw these multinational firms out of existence. They're making record profits. It's just helping small businesses and the middle class and entrepreneurs, the self-employed, people that drive the future of the economy. You set the groundwork for the economy to continue growing. It's not just a temporary spurt of growth because Trump happens to be a money guy. That's what you've got right now, but he has to tackle this bigger issue. Tax reform is one of the reasons that I voted for Donald Trump. I actually like his beliefs, his apparent stated beliefs on tax reform. I don't care if he wants to raise the rate on corporations, so-called. He's actually lowering it. He's just making sure that they pay the new lower rate. You realize how many hundreds of billions of dollars we'd be pulling in over what we pull in now if they were actually paying taxes like they're supposed to? Instead of saying, oh, well, we wrote this off, we wrote that off. We went bankrupt in Bangkok. We've got to write that off too. We built a factory in China. Somehow we can write this off and all this weird shit. That's the problem. Small businesses aren't doing that. They can't branch out at all. They're paying that high rate. And they're stuck there. They can't grow. They can never invest in their own growth. Some entrepreneur, they're paying a high personal income tax. They're barely in the middle class. The government wants a quarter of what they're making, sometimes more. Then you've got self-employment tax, you've got state taxes. They come away with peanuts. I've already seen this, by the way. last year. I wasn't exactly making bank. The government wanted thousands of dollars from me. Thank goodness I had things that I could legitimately write off as expenses because they're related to my work. But they wanted a significant rate. The state, meanwhile, was more like, oh, well, you know, it was below a certain threshold, so you don't really pay anything, I think. I don't know how the fucking state tax rate even works. I'm just like, okay, I'll give you your blood money so you don't throw me in prison. It's basically how people approach taxes anyway. These corporations are never voluntarily going to pay a cent. They'd rather pay some lawyers and accountants that are carpetbagged in there anyway because they know somebody in the business already. They get their high salaries, and they make sure for every dollar they're investing in their army of lawyers, they're getting $100 back. They know this. They're willing to pay some parasites their corporate lawyer fee, and so they don't really pay anything back into the collective pot. Yo, you could lower taxes on the middle class and you'd still end up making more money as long as the corporations were paying. Small businesses, yeah, lower the rate for them. Give them a subsidy if you want to. Hey, smaller businesses, we're gonna try to stimulate them. That's what Bush should have done. Instead, he's just like, hey, I'm gonna stimulate the economy by sending everyone a check. What did they buy? Cheap Chinese stuff. They bought low-end goods primarily. Didn't add to the economy. It added to the economy of foreign nations, because a lot of that money goes right into their pockets. Well, I think it would be nicer to have small and regional chains that are based in the U.S. Why don't we prefer them over some business that has no real loyalty to the U.S.? Sometimes all they do is they re-import goods that they're manufacturing over in China or India or something like that. Yeah, that lowers the price of goods a little bit in the United States. And this is the problem with the neoliberal model within business. It does lower the cost of goods here to get them re-imported from overseas or to take them in directly. But it also depresses wages. Now, if your wages are 50% lower, does it matter if the cost is 5% lower? No, you're still getting screwed. Then you need welfare. Then the government has to raise the tax rate further to give you subsidies and welfare that you otherwise wouldn't need if there was an actual functioning working and middle class in the country. The American dream is the ideal, that somebody who has nothing can at least eke out a decent working class existence. Somebody from a working class family is able to rise up to the middle class and get their little house. Somebody in the middle class, if they're smart, if they're skilled, if they're hardworking, they're capable of rising further. They're capable of attaining a degree of wealth. We don't have that in the United States. Why do you think the economy is depressed? Nobody's willing to lend money. Nobody's willing to invest unless it's on the wild west of the internet, which is why we must protect it. At least that's growing. At least that's becoming more valuable. Hell, it's a cash cow for the Western world, United States especially. Now, Trump should corner the Democrats and force them to vote for such tax reform. He can do it. He's got the ability. It's simple. It's straightforward. It's not that complicated. Remove all those loopholes, lower the overall corporate tax rate. You're still taking in more money, but you're getting it from the right people that should have been paying all along. And then give that relief, that extra money to the middle class so they can purchase what will in some cases be slightly more pricey goods, and subsidies for the very poor because, and Trump has stated this, you don't want people fucking out on the streets in your country. You don't want people suffering. They need to have possibilities too. For a long time, the Republican ethos was branded by its opponents. Not entirely unconvincingly as well. The Republican Party hates the poor. They hate the working class. They suck up to corporations. Now it's the Democrats doing that. So force them to either admit that that's the case or to vote for your tax reform. Either way, they lose. These no-lose situations, Trump sets them up time and time again. That's why I think he will. And I hope he does. He's leaning on the Republicans right now. Oh, don't even wait till September's over. Get it rolling on tax reform. Notice he's abandoned the ACA. They're not talking much about that. Good. Who cares about the issue anymore? The Republicans failed because they let Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell handle it. Ignore the issue entirely and let it metastasize on its own until people force you to tackle it. And so you can get someone sane involved. If it requires working with the Democrats, again, so be it. There are a handful of them that have sanity still. That's all you need as far as votes go to outweigh the never-Trumpers. The John McCains, who will never vote for anything that Trump puts forward unless it involves a nuclear holocaust or something like that. That's what he should do. And I hope, and I think, kind of, that he will. That's about all. Peace out.